All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's event. This is our November Portals community call. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com. Really pleased to welcome all of you and to be back once again for our monthly events. As always, we are led here by Nick Hayduke. Great to have him as always. And a couple notes. We do welcome your questions. Look for the questions block in the webcast interface. Enter them at any time. I'm sure Nick will be keeping an eye on that. I will too. The other point is just that we are recording today's event, as someone has already asked, so we will be sharing that after the event as well. With that, Nick, I'm going to hand things off to you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you answered the question before you even knew it was there. That was great. Okay, yeah, today we are going to be kind of, I guess, continuing on a little bit after last month. I got some feedback from a few people saying that, while the topics that we covered kind of where you could use JavaScript and it's kind of more of a high level thing versus like getting into writing a bunch of code. I did receive some feedback that people want to see some actual code in action, so that's what we're going to do today. So yeah, let's kind of get through the beginning part here, and then we'll dive into actually writing some code. So just quickly, if this is your first time joining one of these, my name is Nicholas Hayduke, President and Software Engineer with Engineered Code Consulting Inc., based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. A Microsoft MVP, and I've been working with the Power Pages, Power Apps portals, ADX Studio portals for many years now, since about 2009. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow us on Twitter, we've got a YouTube channel that's pretty active. We've got our podcast that I'm doing with George Dubinsky. That's a lot more active now. I know I think we just released an episode that we did with Nick Dolman, who is a former MVP, did lots of Power Pages stuff, and is now working on the documentation team at Microsoft. So he was the former co-host with me on Refresh the Cache, and now I've got George Dubinsky helping me out with that. So Nick Dolman's basically a guest on his own podcast. And then I don't think I'm letting any cat out of the bag here, but we just recorded one with Mr. Dalip Singh, who is one of the program managers for Power Pages at Microsoft. He's a frequent guest on the podcast as well, so we did record one with him, and that's, I think, will be coming out here in the next week or so. So yeah, if you are so inclined, feel free to connect or follow or whatever it is people do on social media these days. As always, want to express my gratitude to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World for all their support. I think today wraps up, I guess, season 3 of this. I think we started in 2020, so I think we started in January. So this is our last call of the year. We normally take December off because who wants to listen to one of these calls at the end of December? So, and usually we're a little bit later in the month, but the American Thanksgiving has kind of wiped out next week. So for all of you guys in the US, early happy Thanksgiving. So yeah, this will be our last one for the year, and we'll be back here again in January, which we'll talk about later in the call. Our agenda today, as usual, we'll talk about news, and in fact, spoiler alert, there's not really any news this month, and I'll maybe just chat briefly about why. But then yeah, we'll get into our JavaScript examples, where I'll get away from a PowerPoint deck and I'll just get into coding. I've got a few examples with, what we can do with lists and forms, and we'll see if we can maybe do a little React single page application to get it on our portal as well. So that's what's on tap for today. So as I mentioned, there's not really any news. If you joined us last month, I think we had, I don't know, more news items than we've ever had, and honestly, like, each one of the news items was huge. So I think we had, I don't know, many news items. So I think Microsoft has taken a little bit of a break. All of that was kind of tied to the release of Power Pages. So this news, there hasn't really been any updates on the Power Pages blog. But I think Microsoft deserved a little bit of a break from releasing a bunch of new things. So not much on the news front, no new features that I'm aware of that have been put out recently. But I know we're we're going to be getting soon to the time when the, I think kind of usually in the new year, as soon as the calendar kind of flips around there, that we'll be getting the wave, the 2023 wave 1 release notes. So that week, I suspect those will be, I don't know what date those will come out, but I have a feeling that they might be out before our next call. So hopefully we'll be able to dive through those as well. Okay, so let's get into Power Pages, JavaScript examples. So I did talk about last month kind of all the different places where JavaScript was an option. But again, I didn't really get into any examples. I kind of just stayed in the PowerPoint world, didn't get into writing any code. So that's what that's what's been requested this time. So here are some examples that I'll kind of walk you through, and they're kind of the more common requests that we see come in on on a project. Honestly, a lot of it may remind you of things if you've been in the Dynamics world for a long time. Before things like business rules came along, we had to write some JavaScript on the forms to achieve what we want. And we're kind of in that spot a little bit with Power Pages where there's certain validation you can do, but some of the things we still have to kind of resort to some JavaScript. Again, we'll do some lists. We'll maybe do some web API. So I'll show you how to do some basic web API operations. And then I've also had a request to show, because I did mention, adding a React single page application. So I'll see if we can get one of those built, very simple one, and drop it on the portal and see if we can get that working as well. So that's kind of what I hope to cover today. And for now, I'm going to leave the comfort of PowerPoint, the reliability of PowerPoint, and I'm going to jump over to actually building out some code in these. So we'll probably start here with the forms. So the first thing we'll look at is, how do we hide and show fields, and how can we add some custom validation? So let me just bring up my web browser here. That one is right here. So the first thing I want to talk about is there's many places where you can actually edit JavaScript on a Power Pages site. The few kind of most traditional ones would be within the portal management app. So if I go into the portal management app for my particular site. So maybe what I'll do is I'll first go into my site and show you where we're going to make some changes. So on my particular portal here, we've got this maintenance request thing. So for those of you who don't know, my big kind of hobby outside of work is golf. So that's often what I use in my examples. So in my kind of test portal, what we have is a list of golf courses, and you're able to kind of see some details of these courses. So for example, I'll go in here. Let me actually log in, because that's probably why it's not showing me anything. So what we have on here is like a publicly available list of golf courses, but once you kind of log in, you can see maintenance requests. I always kind of say this whenever I'm doing one of these calls and I'm talking about golf. Augusta National, if any of you have any friends that can get me onto Augusta National, I would owe you a great debt of gratitude. So please, I'm begging all of you to get me onto Augusta National. If you don't know what that means, well, then you're probably not going to be of much help. So, but that's kind of probably one of the most exclusive courses in the world to get on. So anyway, that's why it's on my list here. So what we have here is a list of courses. And what we do is we're kind of pretending here that this is a portal for, a company that has multiple courses, and you can kind of go in there, and what you can do is you actually can create a maintenance request. So I'm going to look at if I go to this one, I should be able to see my list of maintenance requests. I don't have any. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one. I'm going to call this request number 1. Now, what I've done here is I don't have any custom JavaScript. This is just a very basic form which asks me what's the name. I think I was playing around with some of the new features to change the label on that, so that's why it says name 2. I've got a description. I've got a course here that I've got to select. and I got to say which hole I want to do. So pretty basic, but you'll see here that the description isn't required. The only thing that's required here is the name. So what I want to do, the first thing here is, and again, these are kind of random examples. They may not be the best actual business use cases, but what we want to do is I want to, as an example, hide the description until, say, the name field is filled in. That's just I don't know, just random thing I just thought of right now. Let's hide the description until the name to field at least has some value in it. So let's say you can't put in a description until you've at least put in a name. So we've got this form. Where can we write our JavaScript to do that? Again, their business rules don't apply. So the only way to accomplish these types of things with Power Pages is to write a bit of JavaScript. So the two main places historically that we would have done this is by going into the portal management app. If I go to find this create maintenance request form, so that's within my basic forms, and I go into my maintenance request create. If I'm looking at all the options here and I go into additional settings, we've got a custom JavaScript thing down here. So this is where I can add additional JavaScript. And so wherever I place, wherever I place this form, that additional JavaScript will be added to the form. Now, one of the things that confuses a lot of people is that there's actually a number of places I can put this JavaScript. So you have to kind of imagine that when I'm looking at this page, we've got a form that sits on a page. On the page itself, we can also put custom JavaScript. So as an example, if I look at, say, the web page that this is placed on, which is the create maintenance request page. So if I look at the web pages, which is there, if I go to the create maintenance request page and then I go to the localized content, whenever you're dealing with things like JavaScript, you always want to be dealing with the localized content version of the web page. So if I go into here and I go to advanced, we've got some custom JavaScript. So just for fun, I'm going to say alert web page JavaScript. I'm going to save this and I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to refresh the page, and I would have expected to see an alert there. Now, this is a topic that comes up pretty much anytime we're doing anything, and I just want to illustrate the fact that when you make a change, generally when you're working with JavaScript, you're either doing it through the portal management app, or we'll talk about the XRM toolbox or all these different things. Generally, what you have to do is you have to refresh the cache. So whenever you're dealing with JavaScript, generally you're refreshing the cache. So I'm going to go back to my design studio here. I'm going to go to my create maintenance request page, just so when I click this, I'm going to click the sync button. That's just going to clear the cache of the studio here, but I'm going to go to preview. I'm going to create desktop, and that's going to clear the cache. So now the changes that I've made in the back end will be reflected. And so hopefully when I see this, now we get our alert saying web page JavaScript. If I right click and view I gotta click OK. If I right click and view the source of that page, we'll see that the alert that I created here, web page JavaScript, was dropped on the page. And one thing that you'll notice is that it's put in near the bottom of the page. So it's one of the last things to load on the page. And when you're talking about all these dependencies for if you're going to use jQuery and all these things, knowing where JavaScript actually gets put on the page is important. So in this particular case, when you add JavaScript to a web page, it shows up near kind of the bottom of the markup of the entire page. What I'm going to do next is actually I'm going to remove this. So just to be clear, it would be totally possible that you could write your JavaScript that updates how that form works on the web page. Now, where I traditionally put it is I put it on the form because it's possible that this form will get reused. And so if this form shows up on multiple different pages, that means I'm going to have to copy and paste that JavaScript all throughout to every single page. So generally, when you're working with forms, you're going to put that JavaScript directly on the form itself. So that means that no matter where you put that form, that JavaScript is going to reside. So if I go into here, I go into additional settings. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to paste this into my, I'm going to say alert, and I'm going to say basic form JavaScript. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my design studio because again, I have to clear the cache. Go preview, desktop, and that's probably like these days one of the easier ways to clear the cache. So I do this, and now I'd expect to see the basic form JavaScript because I've removed it from the page and I've added to the form. And just to kind of complete the circle here, you'll see that the alert for my basic form JavaScript is no longer put at the bottom of the source because it's tied to the form. So it's basically put at the end, or it's put as part of the form itself. So it actually kind of resides in the middle of the page where that form is actually being displayed. So something to keep an eye on in case you're looking at, kind of weird JavaScript dependencies. If you're looking at how certain things are being included on the page, there's certain references to things. So it's kind of important to know where will that JavaScript actually end up in the source of the page. So I've shown you kind of one example of where we can put the JavaScript, that being in our in the model-driven app. We've talked about how you can put it in the basic form. We've talked about how you can put it in the web page. Those are the two most common things. You can of course put JavaScript in the header and footer if it's JavaScript that needs to be in all the different pages. But I would say that generally where we're seeing most of the JavaScript is either in the basic form. There's also for multi-step forms, there's a place to put JavaScript in the lists and then on the web pages. Those are traditionally where we're seeing those types of things. So now, me personally, I don't love writing JavaScript in this particular interface. Model-driven apps are not the quickest interfaces to be doing development in. So what I'm a big fan of is the Portal Code Editor in the XRM toolbox. So the Portal Code Editor is a tool from Tanguy, the guy who actually builds the XRM toolbox itself, and basically gives you a nice interface for interacting with your JavaScript, your CSS, and your HTML within your Power Pages site. So I'm just going to load my items because I've made some changes here. You can see we've got all the different content on our site kind of grouped. And in our particular case, what are now known as basic forms used to be known as entity forms. So I'm just going to open up entity forms, maintenance request create, and now I see my JavaScript here. So if I go into here, updated, update there, go back to this, go to my design studio. Now again, I have to clear the cache because the Portal Code Editor is interacting directly with Dataverse, so I basically always need to clear my cache when dealing with JavaScript. Go into there, click the clear cache and open it up. And now I'd expect to see that updated message. Basic form JavaScript updates. So the third option, which is becoming more popular now, is to use VS Code. So within VS Code, you can run the PAX CLI tool, so the Power Platform command line interface tool, to download a copy of your site, and then you can then update the JavaScript in there and then push it back up. I'm not going to use that way today. I'm probably going to just stick with the XRM toolbox, but that's kind of the newer way of doing it as well. So those are the three main options right now: Portal Code Editor, using the PAX CLI, or using the Portal Management app. Now, I do have a question here. Is the Portal Management going to be deprecated? I'm curious if I should have my team prioritize using the Power Pages approach moving forward. So now that we've got the new Power Pages Studio that's available to everyone, even if your site was created under the old Power Apps portals, this is a question that we get a lot. Should we be, what's going to happen with the Portal Management app? I think that if the Portal Management app ever goes away, that's a long time in the future. The model that Microsoft is kind of working under right now is they're trying to attack all of the most commonly used options. So they've even started recently giving you ways to edit for metadata in the studio. But there's still a whole lot of features that the portal management app is the only way to configure. And I think we are years, if not decades, away from them closing all that gaps. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if that's a goal of theirs, to close every single one of those gaps. So I think the portal management app is going to be here for a very long time. Generally the recommendation is if you can do it in a studio, often the studio has nicer interfaces for doing it. A perfect example of that would be the table permissions. So if someone is setting up a bunch of table permissions, the interface in the studio is pretty slick for doing that. But there's lots of things that you can't do in the studio. So the answer is you need to know both. Use the studio when you can, when it makes sense, but for a long time, you're going to need to know the portal management app as well. It's not something that you can ignore because just a lot of the functionality, a lot of the advanced functionality, that's the only way to do it. And so, for example, the JavaScript is one example there where if you're doing custom JavaScript, the only way to do that is in the portal management app or using some of those other tools. So I think that using a combination of the studio and the portal management app or the CLI, all those things, you kind of need to know them all. There's no kind of one tool to rule them all. Okay, so let's just write a little bit of JavaScript here that when the name changes, we're going to hide the description. So the first thing I want to talk about is we're going to use jQuery for this. jQuery is what the portal or what Power Pages is built using. There's no requirement that you use jQuery. You could use kind of just plain vanilla JavaScript if you want. You can bring your own other libraries if you want, but the portal has jQuery included with it. And I would say most of the examples that you'll see online from us, from those of us who have blog posts, we're using jQuery because that's just, that's how we've done it for the last 15 years, basically. So no requirement that you use jQuery, but I use jQuery for these types of things because that's just kind of how we've always done it. And so that's how we're going to attack this particular problem, is we're going to use some jQuery. So the other thing I want to point out is when we talk about interacting with the fields, if you're coming from the world of model-driven apps or Dynamics 365, Dynamics CRM, there was always this kind of big no-no: you don't interact directly with the DOM on forms. Because they provided you with an SDK to do things like hide and show fields and change requirements and all that sort of stuff. There was an actual SDK, there was an API that you could use to do those things without interacting with the DOM directly. That guidance does not apply to Power Pages. There is no client-side SDK for interacting with the form elements on Power Pages. So it is okay that you interact with the DOM directly. And so what we do is we have to, if you're just kind of getting started with Power Pages, the way that we figure out how to do these things is by just looking at the markup that this thing generates. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this name to field. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to inspect, and I'm going to bring up my web developer tools. That's not it. Where did they go? There they go. So we can look at this particular input field. And the main key here is that if we look at the name field, so we've got the name field here. So the name field, because Portal still uses ASP.NET Web Forms, the name field is not that overly helpful because it contains that kind of whole control hierarchy if you're familiar with ASP.NET Web Forms. However, if you look at the ID does match with what the underlying logical name is of the field in Dataverse. So in this particular case, this maintenance request is a custom table that I've created, and the name match and the name of the column in Dataverse is nh_name. So we can use that fact, the fact that we know that the fields on the form will have the ID of that relates to the columns. We can use that fact in our JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my thing here, and I'm going to get rid of this. I probably don't need that. I'll leave that there. That might be useful later. So again, we're doing some jQuery here. So we're doing a document ready. Generally, when you're interacting with a form, you do want to wrap everything in the document ready. It basically waits for the form to load. And that's especially important here because, as I mentioned, if I put this JavaScript in the form, again, if we go back to when I looked at the source of the page, the JavaScript actually was existed above where the markup for the form was. So if I didn't put this in the document ready, it would run immediately and the form wouldn't even exist yet. So we generally put things in the document ready. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some jQuery syntax here to target the name field by ID. So the ID name field here, and I'm just going to put a change function in here. So just to test this out, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to alert every time that name field changes. So I'm going to save this, go back here, clear the cache, and we'll see if that little bit of JavaScript is going to fire our alert. So just so you know, the change thing only fires once per change, so it's not on every keystroke. So that's what we expect to see. I typed in a few characters here, and now we're seeing this alert. So now that we've handled the change event of that field, what we want to do is hide this description field if that thing happens to be empty. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on there. I'm going to inspect, and I'm going to just check out. Here we've got this text area, and we're looking at the ID. So the ID is nh_description. So we copy that, go back to my code here. So on the change of this, I'm going to say if this dot val. So if there is no value, I want to hide this. Now, of course, I want to show it, so I'm just going to do a little bit of jQuery magic here. I'm going to use the toggle function, which accepts a Boolean. So if this is true, and I think it would be this way. So basically, if this thing evaluates to true, then it'll be shown. If it evaluates to false, it won't be shown. So basically, every time this changes, the visibility of this field will be updated based on that. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back here, going to clear the cache, and see if that works. Now, we didn't put any logic to hide it when it began. So I'm going to do this, and that's hidden the field. So I got my logic reversed, of course. Toggle if the thing is not there. There. So you can see that we're toggling this particular field. And of course, I've got my logic reversed. So we'll fix that. Could be if it's not that, then show the thing. Now, the other thing I'm going to do here is, because this is essentially the page load for my event, I'm going to call my change function here so that when the page loads, it will respect this rule as well. So I'm going to go back here, preview, go to desktop. And I wonder if, make sure. This dot val. Okay, let me just double check that. So if I refresh this, I still got my logic toggle. So this is the name. This is blank. I would have expected. And let's try that. All right, back here, preview. There we go. So now you can see that if I've got a value in here, this shows up. If I change that, it disappears. Now, you'll notice that we've still got the label here. That's because I've just targeted the actual text area. So it's uncommon for us to want to hide the field and not the label. So again, what we do is we inspect the page and we look at, okay, so if I look at the actual text area, what do I want to hide if I want to hide the label as well? So usually what we'll do is we'll kind of go up the DOM hierarchy and we'll look for something like this cell class. Or we can just look for the closest TD. So we don't want to just toggle that. We want to find dot closest TD. And so that will toggle the entire table cell that will then hide and show the entire section, not just the field itself. There. So when the page loads, I type in something, now I've got that whole section. So again, we're looking at the DOM, we're using jQuery. So what you're seeing is much more kind of traditional web development versus anything else you might have seen in the history with kind of dynamic CRM or how to write JavaScript, because there's no API that we can call in to get us the form fields or anything like that. We're just using more traditional JavaScript and jQuery techniques. So that's how we can do some kind of simple hide show stuff. Obviously, this function that we have here that determines whether something should be hidden or shown. I mean, you could have 5 different fields that contribute to that. You could look at option set value. Like there's a whole bunch you can do in there. But then that's just kind of basic JavaScript. You can then pull the value of different fields. You could look for a certain character. So, for example, index of val dot index of a is greater or equal to 0. So if I do that, it's going to be shown if there's an A in my text. See, now it's not going to show there, but now it's going to show because I put an A. So really, like whatever you can do in JavaScript, you can update your hide and show logic based on that. Okay, let's talk quickly about adding a custom validator. So that's about hiding and showing, but what if we want to make this description required or not required depending on the value that's in the name? So we go here. Microsoft actually has some sample code on how to do that. So I'm just going to be lazy and I'm just going to copy all of this and put it right in here. So when we talk about hiding and showing form fields, if there's any validation that those form fields are doing, then of course we have to be concerned about, if we hide something that's required, then the page isn't going to submit. So in our particular case, I mentioned this earlier that the Power Pages uses kind of the old ASP.NET Web Forms technology. So the whole idea of the like, ASP colon text validator or regex validator, that's how these things are implemented underneath the hood. So thankfully, that framework has a JavaScript API that you can use to add additional validators. So that's essentially what this is doing here. So this page underscore validators array is provided by that client-side API. And in order to add your own validator, what you do is you just create a new span element. You set it up with what to validate, and then the actual function here, which I will go like this to tab it in there properly. So this is the function that actually gets evaluated to determine whether something's valid or not. And then what we do is we add, oh, I see what's going on here. I need to go like this. So basically, once you create that validator, you add it to the list here, and it does that. So for example, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new, so it's going to be, they're always a span. We start off to display none. I'm going to give this one a description validator. The control we're going to validate is, or actually, sorry, let's do name validator. And the control that I want to validate is nh underscore name. You can then put an an error message in here. So this is what's going to show when this thing doesn't actually validate. So typically what you do is you go put that in there, reference control to validate on things, control do that. They've got some, that, and we'll say name must contain a, as an example. So we don't have to worry about the validation group unless you've configured that on your form. We don't have to worry about the initial value, but the big key here is to implement this evaluation function. So this evaluation function needs to return true or false depending on whether the thing is valid or not. So you basically are responsible for implementing this. So I'm going to just do a simple one. If it returns true, that means it's valid. If it returns false, it means it's. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to return nh underscore name. Oh, gotta do the ID. nh underscore name dot index of a greater or equal to 0. So this validator is true if nh name basically has an a in it. So get rid of all that. So what we've done is we set up this validator and it will return true, and then we've added to the collection so that when we click the submit button, it's going to automatically validate all of this for us. So going to save that, go back here, go back to my design studio, preview, refresh the cache, wait for this to load. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say submit. Okay. Wonder if I've got a, oh, I've got an error in my code. That needs to be .val, not just the index of thing. I got to do the name .val. Back to here. All right, there we go. So if I submit here, you can see my validation is running. It's saying that A is a required field and name must contain A because that is not valid. If I put in B, that one will go away, but the name must contain A, which is my custom validation. This form will not submit until I put A in there. So now I've put A in there, and now it's going to submit. So basically, the A needs to be in that thing to submit. So again, you can imagine how complex this function could be. It could be a super complex function that calculates a bunch of things. So lots of possibilities here, but that's how you can add some additional validation. So you could do regular expressions, you could do all sorts of things in here, conditional on other fields. Again, using this technique where we can get the value of a field on the form by using this syntax of getting the field by ID. So those are kind of the basics of form validation, form hiding and showing. Again, just kind of basic jQuery things. The trick to know with Power Pages is that the ID of the column is the ID of the field. And then when it comes to validation, just hooking into the ASP.NET Web Forms validations and using this page underscore validators control. The next thing I want to talk about here was lists. So if I go to golf courses and I look at my lists of golf courses, you can write JavaScript that modifies this list as well. The one, and a lot of it's similar to what we just talked about. The one big difference here is that when you have multiple pages of data in this list, every time you click and see a new page of data, the whole page doesn't refresh. So you can't really rely on the page loaded event or the document ready event to do your work. You have to basically handle every time the grid refreshes. Now, thankfully, Microsoft has made that kind of easy for us. Again, they've got some sample JavaScript for us that we can do. So I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to go into my entity lists, my golf courses, and I'm going to add this JavaScript. So again, we add our code to the document ready to make sure it's loaded, or to make sure the grid is there. And then what we do is we attach to this, we attach on that entity grid onto this loaded event. So this loaded event fires every time a new page of data is loaded. So that's the big key with the lists, is to make sure you're putting it into this loaded event. So you can see in this case, what it's doing is when it's loaded, it's then finding all of the children. So it's finding all the table cells where the account number is at, and it's doing something. So what we want to do in this case is, can go back here, and what I want to do is, because Augusta National is so important, I want to highlight it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect this cell, and there's a lot of goodness that you'll see behind the scenes when you inspect the cells of these lists. There's a lot of data dash attributes that tell you what the data is. So you can see here, we got our table row. This first column here, you can see they're telling you it's a string. They can tell you that it's actually the NH underscore name column. They're telling you what the value is. They're telling you what the header name is, and they're telling you what the label is. So you don't have to kind of dive in and figure out, like if you want to figure out what the value is, you don't have to kind of browse through all the markup. You know, you can just look at that data dash value. So in my case, what I want to do is I want to look for a TD where the data dash attribute is NH underscore name. So TD where the database is NH underscore name. And then for each one of those, and honestly, there's a way that what we could do here is I also want to do it where the data dash value is Augusta National. So this is going to find only the cells where the name, where the data attribute is NH name and the data value is Augusta National. And for each one of those, what we're going to do is we're going to say CSS background color green. So it's going to take that table cell and turn it green. I promise you, you can never get code like this right the first time. So we'll see what I'm missing in that thing when we try this. Golf courses. Oh, look at that, it actually worked. So the keys here are, you got to use that loaded event, because if Augusta National happened to be on the second page, when you click to the next one, that logic wouldn't refire unless you use that loaded event. And the other thing is, again, inspecting the DOM. By inspecting the DOM, you'll see a whole lot of hidden goodies in here that aren't necessarily, you're not going to find a page on Microsoft's documentation site that says, hey, here's all the attributes you can expect. You kind of have to look and kind of hope and assume that those will be there going forward. We have no reason, like, as far as we're concerned, if Microsoft were to change that, that would be a break and change, and they would kind of notify us about those. This is essentially their version of the API. It may not be documented, but the community is kind of aware of these things, and we wouldn't expect them to change that without proper notification. So you can use this. You can add extra columns if you want, because again, you're just getting into standard DOM manipulation with jQuery. So you could add extra TDs, you can add extra headers, you can change the content of that stuff. All the things you can do in JavaScript, you can manipulate the form with. So, okay, I do want to quickly talk about the Web API. So with the Web API, the Web API is the way that in JavaScript we can interact directly with Dataverse. So far what we've talked about are forms and views, and how do we update the forms and the lists, and how do we use JavaScript to make those different than what they are out of the box. But what if we want to just write our own complete UI? What if we just want to build a web template that has a bunch of fields on it? The user puts in all their data, they click submit, and it creates a record in the backend, and we want to do that all from scratch. We don't want to use the forms and lists functionality. We can use the Web API. So the Web API is set up by going into site settings, and there's a few site settings that we have to set up for every single table that we want to enable it for. So you can see here, I've actually got it enabled on two different tables. I've got it enabled on the account, and I've got it enabled on the contact. Now, just to be clear, this isn't best practice. Normally, we wouldn't have star on there, but you can see what you have to do is you have to enable the account table, and then you have to decide which fields can be accessed through this Web API. Now, the star means that all columns are available. Generally, in production, what we'd want is a defined list. It's a comma delimited list of all the different fields that are available. But just as for the sample, what we'll do is we'll do a Web API operation that creates an account. So we can see that accounts are enabled. What we then have to do, whenever you were using the Web API, we also have to check our permissions, because the Web API does enforce table permissions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see what permissions we have on the account, and we can see, again, bad practice in real life, but in this particular case, just to make our demo easier, we've got an account global permission set up. So that means we can do whatever we want to accounts. I'm just going to double check which web roles. But this is only available to authenticated users. So we got a little bit of safety in there, but any authenticated user has all these permissions on accounts. So now that we know we've enabled the Web API with those couple of settings, we've got the permissions. The actual JavaScript looks similar to interacting with the kind of more traditional Dataverse Web API. It's an OData. It's an OData interface. So let's just look at doing a simple query to create a new account. So as an example, we are going to, the key here is Microsoft gives us this wrapper API function. So this AJAX function, or this function uses the jQuery AJAX, and it basically handles some of the security aspects for you. So the big thing that it does is it includes the request verification token, which is required, and it handles getting the token. So to make sure that the user has it has an appropriate token. So in our case, we said a user has to be an authenticated user. So this function you'll see we've been in lots of implementations where this kind of function exists in 100 different places. Try to centralize that if you can, but just to be lazy, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this into my golf course list thing here. And then what I'm going to do is just on the page load, I'm going to create an account. So if I go back to my code here, we'll see that here is the web API operation that you can use to create an account. So I'm going to put that in my document ready. So because, like I mentioned, it's an OData API, so to create an account, we'll do a post. You can see here, we got the URL /API/accounts, and we're going to create one where the data name, where the name of the account is sample account. Portals community call. So this thing just calls this function, which has been defined here. So we've got our web API function, which gives us this safe AJAX function. Again, this, I mean, it's cool to understand it, but again, it's just something that Microsoft is kind of some sample code that Microsoft gives us to run this function. This is the key here, right? It's running this particular request. We're doing a post. If you want to do an update, you can do, and Microsoft's got great samples about here's how to do an update, here's how to do a delete, and the web API also supports read. So you can query records, you can do fetch XML, you can do all sorts of different operations. So the documentation on this is pretty good. So I'm just going to save this and see if I can get an account called sample account for Portals community call to show up in my Dataverse environment. So I'm going to go to golf courses because that's the page where it exists. I'm going to go to desktop, and I'm just going to keep an eye on this page when it loads. I'm going to look at the network call that gets generated. So this is it right here. We'll see what happens on it. All right, so we got a 204 request. So we can see in our payload, it's just that sample name for Portals community call. No response, it's a 204, no content. But if I go over to here and I go to Dataverse, I go to tables. And if I look at my account table, I should see my sample account for PCC. So there it is. So we can see that the portal user ran that JavaScript, it created an account using their authentication. So beyond that, I mean, the portal's web API is pretty straightforward if you're familiar with OData or if you've ever used kind of the more traditional Dataverse API. And the documentation has lots of good examples about how to relate things and you know, that sort of thing. So you know, how to do things with lookups, how to do option sets. They've got good examples of that. But the key is know that this wrapper function exists, and then from there, it's pretty straightforward to do the calls that you need to do. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So the last thing I want to talk about quickly was just the React app. So that would be, so what I have here is I have a very, very simple React project that has a few different apps in it. One of these is a hello world that if I look at the hello world, it's a very basic hello world type thing that has content snippet, has sample input, sample output, and essentially what it does is it looks for, when you load this particular React app, it gets the element by ID, so it's looking for an element with an ID of root, and that's where it will drop this app on here. So all I've done is I've built this thing, and the key is that in my distribution, what I get for this particular hello world is this giant JavaScript file. So the key to building a single page application in React and drop onto the portal is that you have to get this JavaScript file onto your portal. And then once you add it to the page, you put a div with, because we set it up to do a, to look for a, sorry, hello world would be this one, to look for a document, or sorry, an element with the ID of root. That's what it'll kind of attach itself to. So if I go back here, I go into the design studio, and I just call this thing React. We don't need to do that, add that. So what I'm going to do, because I'm a fan of the Portals code editor, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to say load items. Under web pages, I should see that React page I just built. So within here, what we need to do is the content of the page. We basically need div ID equals root. I'm going to save that. And if I were to preview this page, what I'm going to get is a page with a header and footer, but the main content of the page is blank. If I view source, I look for the word root, ID equals root. We can see that my div is there. Now what we have to do is we have to upload the JavaScript to there. Now I'm going to cheat here. I'm just going to go into here. I'm going to upload it using the front-side editor. Now this front-side editor is going away, so usually you could add it as a web file in the back end, but we are running out of time here. So I'm going to go into my distribution, I'm going to go into my hello world, and I'm going to upload my file here. So this is being uploaded as a child of the React page. So I save this. I wonder if I've enabled, okay. So now if I go to index.min.js, what did I call that thing? Index.min.js. Just gonna clear the cache here. I have a theory. I'm just going to check out my web files here. Web files. Notes. Yeah. So my guess is it failed because it doesn't want to let me add JavaScript. Yeah. So when you're adding JavaScript, what you often have to do is you have to go into the advanced settings. You have to go into administration, I think. Essentially, JavaScript is by default blocked for uploading files. This might take a second to load, but we have to enable it so that we can upload a JavaScript file as a valid extension. Normally, for security reasons, it's blocked. This whole interface takes a long time. So we'll wait while that loads. So the only other thing that you'd have to do is you go back into here, and what you do is you have to add a script reference to that JavaScript that we just uploaded. So it would be something like index.min.js. So now we've included that in there. Now I know in this particular case, I haven't bundled React with it as well. So I probably have to grab the version of React that I have. Because when I look at my build dependencies, my dev dependencies don't include the React stuff. So I would also have to include some script references here for React itself. I don't know if the samples give me that information or not. Oh yeah, they do. So if I copied hello world, so there's a bunch of these. So you essentially kind of copy these script includes because you can see here we've got the div root. So I'm going to save that. I know we're kind of running out of, we're out of time here. We'll just see here, block extensions. I'll get rid of JavaScript. Save that. See if that loads. All right, so while that's loading, just quickly, our next call will be January 19th. Looking for ideas if anyone's interested in submitting some topic ideas. Again, today was kind of based on the feedback we received. Thank you to Jason. And yeah, I'm just trying to see if I can get this last thing here. Give me one more second. Doesn't like loading that. Looks like that's saved. Notes, attach a file, index min.js. Now that that's in there, in theory, if I go back here, say preview, desktop, there's a chance that it would load, but I'm sure I'm missing something in there. But this is where we would expect that the thing, because now if I go to index.min.js, there's my JavaScript. So my guess is the reason this isn't loading is I'm still missing a script reference. Of course, now my browser's not liking it, but that's essentially the step. I'm probably missing one or two script references, which is why the whole thing isn't loading. But essentially the steps are build your React app, upload your React app as a web file to Power Pages, or you host your JavaScript somewhere, and then you can embed that JavaScript app or that React app in there. And if you want to use the web API in that JavaScript app, you can certainly do that. I see a question here about payments. So you can certainly do some payment stuff with JavaScript. However, most of the, in order to secure most payment things, JavaScript isn't enough. You do need some sort of server endpoint to process the payment securely. So JavaScript certainly help you do a payment experience, but in terms of a complete life cycle to get your payments in there, generally you have to do a bit of server-side code there as well to actually handle the transaction. All right, any other questions? I know we're over time here. Just gonna take a look to see a target of type container isn't. Target container isn't a DOM element. Yeah. Jason, anything else that you wanted to add before we let the folks go?
No, just that we'll follow up with links to next January's event and the recording for this event. And yeah, I second Nick's point about sending in feedback. You can send it to me or to Nick directly, obviously. And we definitely take that. And I know that, as you can see, Nick uses it.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Sorry, the question about payments was the next meeting. So we had we had a session just a couple months ago on payments. So I'm not sure if you had a chance to review that recording or not, but check that out. If you have more questions, let me know. But we did kind of cover some different options for payments in the call. I want to say it was, might have even been September or August. We had a whole session on payments.
Check in our video library for Portals community. Just search on the term Portals community call in the filters, and it might show up there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we can end it there then. Thanks again, Nick, and thanks to everyone for all your time and attention. That was great. And I guess, Nick, happy holidays and happy New Year, since we're not going to do this again before January.
Yeah, enjoy Thanksgiving and all the other holidays. And yeah, we'll see everyone in the new year. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.